Wow. See, that was it. It was worse. Right.
Alrighty, I have 6:30 on the dot. I can go ahead and call us to order for this regular planning commission meeting for June 18th, 2024. If you've all had a chance to look. Oh, actually. Let's do Chrysler. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. This actually really nice June evening, so it must be important. Are we good for technology?
Yes.
Okay. All right, you guys have had a chance to look at minutes from our May 21st meeting. I would definitely entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion and a second, any discussion? Here we go, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, well, that takes care of the housekeeping business. On to a work session, which I'm not exactly sure. Holly, are you going to sort of lead?
We actually have a guest presenter this evening.
Okay.
Who will be,
So is that Jerry?
yes,
Okay, all right, well, what's gonna be the format? Are you gonna have him present from the podium or from a sitting position, or what do you think would be the best?
does the sound pick up better?
It does pick up better from the podium.
Okay. Sorry.
That's all good.
I guess they want you at the podium, so, do you want name and address for the record?
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening, my name is Jerry Jones. I'm with Mocker. We're a developer here in the Northwest, and our address is 1051 Northwest Bond Street, Unit 205 in Bend, Oregon, 97703. First off, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, for being here. Like you said, it is a beautiful night out here, so it is helpful that we're here in person to go through this work session. We've been working with staff, and I first want to call out that it's been great to work with Vicki and Sean. They've been super helpful when I first came to them with some ideas of a potential text amendment, and as well as Holly as well. They have been super helpful, gracious to walk through some of these processes, and which has led us here tonight. So I want to say a little bit about who is here with me tonight. See that next slide. We're on a PDF slide here. So as I said, I'm Jerry Jones, and also with me today, I have two professionals from Sage Architecture. Seth Anderson, who's a principal architect, and Scott Winters, who's a job captain, who has been our project lead working through some of these scenarios. On the next slide, I just want to call some attention to your recent community vision action. Being someone that sat on a community vision action plan before, I understand all the time and everything that goes for that. And it's super fun, right? I kind of equate that back to when I would play Sim City. Like, hey, what's this city going to be when we continue to grow, or what are our aspirations? So reading through your guys' action plan, I thought it was very well thought of. I want to pull some items from that, not everything, of course. I know it's well recent in your guys' minds, but some strengths. Hubbard being a small and friendly city, check to that. Trying to get some small business development and having some small businesses thrive here in Hubbard, which is a great plan. And forward-thinking leadership. I think I've already talked about some of that with some of the staff, and then as well as you all as well. And then some top-notch public safety. All of those four good, pillars to being able to build through a city. Some weaknesses I just want to touch on: limited retail and restaurant options that was called out, and a rundown image along Highway 99. And then some opportunities, some developable land in the downtown area was called out, as well as some revitalization along that's been long overdue. So what we're trying to hope with this text amendment is to tackle some of those bottom two bullet points by use of understanding some of those strengths that Hubbard has as well. So in the next slide, you'll see what we have as some development goals through the use of this text amendment. I have an example of a property here that's just along 99. It's just an average industrial use, but it's unsightly, and it's certainly not consistent with that recently adopted community vision, right? The idea is, how can we get to redeveloping some of these areas to really see how Hubbard can prosper? through the use of a text amendment, our goals would be on either a property like this or others, what could the future look like? On a property like this in the commercial area, you could see something, maybe 70 apartments. I think residential is really needed in this area. I know one business owner who would love to have people, live much closer to his operation. There would be park-like amenities, open spaces, and then some of what you would see in a mixed-use development along with the residential are things like coffee shop, right? They're used almost daily. Restaurants of all different sizes, maybe some quick restaurants, maybe some more sit-down diners, and then some small business retail. And I just listed a couple that came to my mind real quick are things like hair salons, dental, medical, and clothing shops, sporting goods, places for dessert who doesn't like an ice cream, right? Mail stop, insurance agents, real estate offices, personal health. Those are just some things that could go inside of one of these mixed-use buildings. So when I looked at the commercial zone there, and if we really wanted to aspire to some of those goals and bring some of those goals to fruition here in Hubbard, there are some barriers. Right? There's some barriers with developing a mixed-use building that has a code which requires anything of residential, and I'll use the quote unquote, above retail or commercial, which your current code has right now. So the only way for us to bring those goals that we talk about into a property like I've shown is to be able to have ground floor retail, ground floor commercial with residential units above that, right? And so that's a real barrier. And the barrier, I think, what I want to show on that is really threefold, and it's scope, schedule, and budget. As a project manager, those are like three pillars I use all the time. So on a scope wise, the current code only allows for that combined residential with a use over a commercial use, right? That would be the one word I would target in the code today if we wanted to just change one thing, but we've got a different option for you. And it requires a very complex building design called a podium design, which has a lot of extensive use of concrete and steel. I'm sure you guys are used to seeing some of those maybe in other places, but it's very expensive. We talk about schedule. The market that's needed to attract a combined end user to build something like that, or the investors that has an appetite for that, the search for that is very lengthy. And so it'll just continue to sit stalled out for a while until we can find something that's a little bit more, a bite at some sort of development that's a little bit more attainable for this region. And in budget, the cost for that style of construction of a podium is almost 40%. It's actually 38.2, I think, percent when working with a company called R&H, who is very well known throughout the area. It's higher than those traditional apartments, which might be like a 3-story, what we call woody walk-up apartments, where you guys have probably seen a bunch of them, with next to horizontal mixed use by having a 1 or 2-story commercial use on the same property, but not requiring that residential to be above it. So the pictures that I show here are things that I would say would stand out here in Hubbard, maybe not the fit to what you've seen in the visioning yet, maybe someday in the future, but this is what the only way of mixed use that currently your code would allow. And so these type of buildings at these densities really fit into a property like I showed you guys, but they don't think they fit the current characteristics, right? So, and with the monetary costs being too expensive to build, we were trying to find a code amendment that would really unlock development potential in this area and really start to catalyze and move some stuff forward for your vision. So these are mixed use areas that is probably more to the scale of Hubbard, that could be exciting for investors, also enough of an appetite where people could have the funds to build those in such a tough market of financing construction costs right now. Your typical 3-story woody walk-up type apartments. And in that top right, you'll see some apartments, you'll see some 2-story offices, and you'll see a little market as well there on the corner. So those are the type of buildings that through this text amendment, you could start to see. On this slide here is a stab at a draft of a text amendment. And this is what we'll use to walk through tonight. I think the future stages, as Holly said, would be, we have a discussion tonight. We look for a ton of feedback from you all with the architects that we'll have when they come up after me, just to talk through different design, talk through different ideas of bringing mixed use and different goals that you guys have in working through these ratios, different ratios that we'll have to talk about. I'll turn that over to Seth when it's his time. Parking ratios, how much floor area ratios will you allow for residential versus commercial? How much commercial has to be done and designed before you'll unlock the residential use? Before, when we had targeted just one section in 2.106.2, I think it was E, where we talked about the above word, where we just maybe we just strike that above word. It seemed, in working with staff, that might just be a little bit too narrow. It might be just a quick Band-Aid for the city of Hubbard. And this proposal would allow you to come up with a mixed use code that then you could place against any one of your zones that you see fit, either now or in the future. We'll have that discussion here in a little bit too. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Seth Anderson on the stage, and he's going to walk through some of these schematic designs that he's put forth to really talk through numbers and some ideas on how this code would unlock development potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. As Jerry said, I'm Seth Anderson. I'm an architect. We do commercial and housing development across the Northwest. This is my colleague Scott Winters. Scott's a job captain and has been helping with some of these potential solutions. So what we're really interested in talking to you about is another type of development that Jerry's been about. So the vertical mixed use development, we have an example of what that would look like on a property, so you can kind of see what a solution is. But our goal is to find something that fits your community, something that fits the character and the vision of your community. And we think we have some alternate strategies with this horizontal mixed use idea. And really what horizontal mixed use about is maintaining the commercial need in a commercial district or a mixed use district, so that you're still creating that economic viability, you're creating a place for business and growth in that, but then using land that might not be as attractive to a retailer or to a restaurateur for a use that you also need some housing and some development. As Jerry said, this type of development is less costly to build. It's a less complicated construction type and tends to be more attractive to retailers because they know and understand this kind of single story development. So Scott's going to walk you through a couple of concepts that we've developed and some of the pros and cons on them. But the key to what we would like to discuss with you is really there are varying ways to accomplish horizontal mixed use and various items that you can place into your planning code to get the desired effect you want. And really, when you're doing a site plan and a mix of uses, those are floor area ratio, the quantity of parking, and the quantity of open space. That's really what determines, how a site gets developed. So we have shown in these three scenarios for a subject property, it's like what those kind of, as we pull those different levers with on the specific site, I mentioned the less desirable. So we'll take this example, this first concept example. You'll see we have a commercial building that fronts the street. So we're helping in good design. We're helping to build that edge and create that activity along, in this case, the highway. That type of frontage along the street like that is very attractive to businesses because they get those pass metrics, and then someone comes in and serves or wants to use that business. And then we have a second building in this concept that then is set back from the road, but creates that commercial center, creates a little bit of vitality. We've got some outdoor spaces in this one where you could have some outdoor dining or some fire pits and things like that that people can enjoy. And then the residential is really tucked behind that. And so you have the commercial use in the commercial zone, and then you're adding this horizontal mixed use of the residential. So with that, I'll let Scott run through the couple of scenarios, and we can talk some data point on those levers that I talked about.
All right, thank you. Again, I'm Scott Winters, and I'm a big nerd. I love development code, and I've done a lot of these projects where a developer comes and says, hey, what can we, what can be done here, right? And so you identify certain things about the development code, uses, parking, height, things like that, and those really guide what can be on there. Another thing is similar to y'all. I'm a planning commissioner with the city of Bend. Been doing that for about 6 years. So it's really fun being on this side of the podium. And so when we're looking at what we can build here in the sites and certain constraints, not all sites are the same. What's important to the vision of the community. And so obviously for commercial areas, you want to have that commercial kind of addressing the street, right? You want to create that vibrancy. And when you look at a map of Hubbard behind you, you can just see the different size and placement and spatially of the buildings, and you could just tell, just looking at maps, like the feel of certain areas, right? And so some areas, obviously, they need a little bit more help, a little bit more of a kind of a gentle touch, I should say, or availability for opportunities with the code. So this is an example of we've got 2 commercial buildings, so you can have the commercial right up on the street. You can have commercial that's tucked back that maybe doesn't need that frontage, but definitely helps create some synergy between the 2 buildings. And then you have apartments that are further back, because sites that are shaped somewhat like this, commercial in the back is kind of a dead zone, right? That's not, unless, I mean, I can't imagine with something like this, like a draw. You'd be very specific in terms of what type of commercial that could work in. And so having the apartments in the back, one, it allows for a mixed use. So the commercial developments will love having, in this example, 72 units right walking distance from them. They don't have to cross a highway. They don't have to cross a railroad track. They're right there. And it just creates a really good synergy. We go to the next slide. And so these are all kind of the 3-story when you walk up. So we're showing them, we're not trying to show pretty renderings of this and that and, kids playing and puppies and rainbows. We're just showing this is kind of what can be built physically for this area. And so here's a few different views, seeing in that lower left side, you see this is more from the street angle and really showing how this horizontal mixed use kind of satisfies that goal of having people and businesses on the same site, but really putting the businesses front and center, the commercial areas, and then having a kind of a more residential feel in the back, which in a lot of these spaces are adjacent to residential units behind it. So it's a great transition. So go to the next slide. So here's an example, and this one is a little bit lighter on the commercial, but because it's a little bit lighter on the commercial, there's more opportunity to have a kind of communal lawn area, playground, things like that. And so, we drove through the town and looking and investigating Hubbard, we could see that there's a lot of parks on the one side of Hubbard and maybe not necessarily on the other. And so here's an example of, this is the same number of units, just a little bit less commercial. Commercial frontage is exactly the same, but it provides a little bit more of an amenity to that area, which again, is not just for the apartments that are on the site, but just anyone who's around. Go to the next one. So here's some perspective of that, kind of showing that there's still that commercial frontage, and actually both of these first ones trying to create that, when you have that residential adjacent to commercial, not necessarily over, it allows for a little bit, again, lower scale. You're not trying to be Portland, it's be Hubbard, and just have that connectivity to the neighboring properties. So the next slide is what is allowed in the current code. So the first two slides would not, they violate the development code. This meets code. And this is a mixed-use building with ground floor commercial and residential side. So a couple problems with this is, one of them is, as Jerry mentioned, it gets much more expensive when you start having to add elevators and have that podium style construction. It's just a more expensive plan. It's generally fit for areas with higher, like really high property values in order for it to pencil out. The other thing is having the commercial on the ground floor means you have to fill that whole commercial space below the apartments. So every time you put an apartment space above it, you need that much commercial. So in this one, it's a lot of commercial square footage in order to satisfy that. And then you have 3 stories of residential. And then this one, and I should actually, sorry, I forgot to mention that the other two, the parking was not up to the 2 units per, or 2 parking spaces per unit. They were around 1.4, 1.5. This is what 2 units or 2 spaces per unit looks like with this type of development. And then if you go to the next slide, you can start to see, okay, well, this is what a floor plan or site plan looks like. This is what you see from a perspective here. So in order to satisfy this, it requires a very large, big parking area. And then that commercial frontage is still there, but it does kind of loom large because you're forced to put the residential above the commercial. And in order, once you start doing that, in order to make it pencil out, you really have to kind of go up to the height limit and just make that, I guess, as robust as it can be in order to have it work. So those, I think, is that the last? Yeah, that's the last slide. So this is kind of what we found from investigating the development code, what can be built, what it looks like. But I think the big goal here today is to just get feedback from you guys at the working session. You know, we're not a proposal of anything. It's just, we're just trying to figure out what your guys' vision of Hubbard and the development code and how that affects development is. Thank you. Thanks, Scott. I think now it's just really just trying to turn it into a true working session. I would like to roll the sleeves a little bit and just say, hey, what are your thoughts, initial thoughts? What questions do you have of myself, of the team, from the information that we presented and some of the thoughts? And with the goal, like Scott said, is like, we would like to leave with some sort of information that says, well, either one, hey, we don't want to text them at all, get away, right? Okay, that's one answer. The more sought after answer we're looking for is, we can see how a mixed use code can benefit Hubbard. And here are some of the things that we'd like to see within that. We'd like to explore what does parks looks like in open space ratios, right? What does floor area ratios that we've talked about, and what does parking look like? So, and that last one, you saw what 2 units per unit, 2 parking stalls per apartment unit looks like, right? That is just a sea of asphalt, right? And we recognize that this is an automobile commuter city. We understand that, but you know, would the city be more flexible to go to something like 1.5 parking stalls per unit, like you saw in the first 2? So really, that's probably just a kicker to start a conversation. Love to hear your thoughts. And it might be either one of us that bounce up and respond to those.
I'd say, yeah, I don't think 1.4 or 5 is reasonable, because not only can no one person really afford apartments these days, but also you have the employees of whatever the commercial agency would be. So parking would definitely become a bit of an issue, I think. That's my take on that.
Those examples did include the commercial parking and then the 1.4 to 1.5 for the unit. So it was not excluded.
You know, on the parking issue, I'm a minimalist when it comes to regulations. That's the business's job to figure out what parking they need for their apartments and what parking they need for their, business. If they get it wrong, people won't come to the site, people won't want to buy apartments. I don't need to tell them they need to have 2 units, 1, 1.5, 0, let them figure it out. Not something we need to overregulate.
So I guess my question, if we overlay this in certain areas, it's like, what you're proposing would be a text amendment for, I don't know, maybe you could answer this. The text amendment would overlay in quite a few different areas. Would that be an accurate statement, or would it be very limited to just commercial?
I think the initial proposal is just the general commercial zone. I don't know if the consultants reviewed at all the residential commercial zone, for feasibility or utility. No, okay.
Do you guys have comments just to?
But willing to, like we talked about before, we've talked about if this is something that the city of Hubbard does want to adopt, and there are other zones that you'd like to place this within, certainly we can make sure that the text amendment includes those zones as well. We just haven't dove any deeper into any other zones outside the general commercial.
I'm just thinking of like 3rd Street, which is historically downtown. I'm not sure how this would look, how this would feel, in terms of having, residential right on the ground in that particular area. Second follow-up, what do these developments look like in 12, 16 years? How do they get stale? Do they hold, a certain curb appeal? That would be my question. What do they look like in?
They get dated.
Well, not so much data, but you know what I mean? Are they gonna be viable, assets to the community in that length of time? I understand housing is really, really, very much in need right now, but.
Certainly, our experience is that they will continue to be viable throughout several decades and even generations. That means that does come require with some upkeep, right? And some deferred maintenance and making sure that your storefronts and the elevations of your apartments are updated with the times that they are. But generally, as those are updated, they get used. And if you look at the different uses within inside those residential or the retail buildings, that will really define on is your community using that asset? Is that viable, right? It's market driven, much like Commissioner Patrick is saying. And as someone that is could be potentially leasing those out, you want to make sure you get that right and continue to get that right. I can guarantee you your game plan on year 10 is not going to be the same game plan that you had on year 1 just because of whatever changes happen. But as far as the size and scale, I think they'd be certainly viable over the next several decades.
And the arrangement of the retail in those is a tried and true model that's done in communities everywhere.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just in observing, I would totally agree with that statement, so.
Whereas the mixed use model is a little bit newer and it's harder to fill some of those units on a first basis, but having built-in residence is nice for any commercial model. Sure.
And I think too, it's depending on the specific site, right? So if the example site that we showed was not as deep, if it was 1/3 as deep, then it wouldn't even be, there'd be commercial in there and that's what would fit. So the sites in your downtown, what you see on the frontage commercial, if that property was much deeper, then it
Because
would
of the
probably
ratio factor,
it would
it wouldn't even be an option in that overlay is what you're saying.
Yeah. And there's I've seen codes where a certain percent of the frontage has to be commercial. So that way you don't have a small, coffee stand and then apartments or something like that. So it meets the intent because when you're, how you feel as you're walking along the street is very dependent on what's right there. And so that's where that horizontal just allows that option, which the vertical mixed use might not work in a lot of areas.
Go ahead, Holly.
I'm curious about property ownership. Is just generally in other cities, not this site specifically, are you finding folks who want to own and operate multifamily developments, are those the same type of people who like to lease out commercial space?
Typically not.
Right. So
There
how
are
does
a
that
few of
work?
them. There's a handful of them.
Uh-huh.
Generally, they will do partnerships with other folks. And so, where if someone is attracted to the site because they want to build the apartments, they will do a partnership, a joint venture with someone that likes to do more of the retail.
Okay.
And so that's just a necessity. If they could do a property line between the two of them, they would much rather do that. But if you do the property line between the two of them, then you don't have the mixed use, right? You don't have those two compelling uses.
Right.
And the reason why cities like those mixed uses, so that people aren't just only building residential or only building commercial.
Mhm.
Really, you're getting both of those and you get a little bit of walkability and some use for that.
That's why in Sim City, when you're like, why is there traffic problems? Like, put some commercial here and keep some residential. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense because the vertical mixed use, generally when it's one building, then you've got someone building apartments and trying to figure out how to lease out commercial, and they might not be as
Yeah.
knowledgeable about that. And then this is kind of a cleaner separation.
I've seen more so scenarios where someone has gone for the commercial and then they just did the residential, the apartments. I've seen that more so than I have someone that wanted to build apartments and manages and does it as a property manager, like they know their core competency. They do not want to jump usually into some of that retail stuff that just might be beyond them. And in this scenario and you know, the property owners that we're talking with that would love to take advantage of this, I think that's a person very capable of doing both, so it works out on this property.
Go ahead, Holly.
Sorry, another question. So the city of Hubbard is just beginning a brand new economic opportunities analysis. And so we are looking at all of our employment land, commercial and industrial, and we're determining our long-term need. We expect that we will need more than what we have, based upon the rate of development over the last couple decades. How is this accounted for in this type of an inventory when this certain property was counted as employment land, but now it's a question mark as to how many jobs potentially could be provided here or how many residential units could be provided here? How have you heard this conversation go in the past?
Sure. I've sat on a few EOAs, economic opportunities analysis, technical advisory committees, and throughout different cities. And as they search through your code and they see that allowance of, yes, they could have some residential. So that's allowed in your code right now. You could do some residential, albeit over some commercial, right? So they will put some calculations towards what that residential could be. So it might not skew your new EOA hardly at all if they did those calculations correctly and they saw that portion of code. You would just have to pull that out and draw that out from those that are doing the math. This would certainly call out to say, hey, this is an opportunity. It's something that the city of Hubbard sees as something that they want based upon vision, right? And you would want to make sure that in those advisory committees, the EOA is taking that into account. That, I guess that could mean if they're saying, hey, there's the amount of commercial though, that's going to be honest, is still the same amount of commercial on it. You're just adding some residential. It could mean that they don't expand other residential areas. I don't know, but I don't see that happening right now with what we're seeing throughout the state. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, Sam.
I was gonna ask with that existing use, if that was the thing that came to my mind on this specific site is it's existing commercial, it's already included as developed property.
But the code would apply to the entire zone.
Right, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I'll just say that I think this concept of mixed-use development is great. I think you mentioned it being a newer concept. I'm gonna say it's the oldest concept ever. You know, people have been building houses next to where they work since time began. We've only been doing exclusive zoning since the 1920s. You know, I live over on 4th Street, so I'm in walking distance of a pub, a couple of restaurants, the post office. It's wonderful, you know, it helps you build that community, potentially a less auto-focused community, the kind of community where you keep some of those dollars local because you're spending them at the business next door, is not driving, you know, to Woodburn or Canby. I think this is just a no-brainer. This makes sense to me all day long. I love it.
Thank you.
I've lived in this community except for about 5 years for the last 40 years, so 35 of the last 40 years, either Hubbard or Alexandria. And I follow community forums, I sit in city council meetings. This is what people want. People want more smaller businesses here. People want to be able to access those things that go to other towns. But I just moved my son into an apartment complex outside of Canby. And just finding a parking spot is so difficult. So I understand what Patrick's saying about not over-regulating things, but I don't know. I think there's a balance there. So I would like to see, and I know this community would like to see more of those small type business opportunities come in here. So, but
Great.
yeah, I don't know about, like you said earlier, I don't know about 1.4, 1.5 parking spots per apartment.
I believe my only concern about, I'm sorry, about the parking thing is just based on my understanding of the cost of living for rent or whatever for apartments. There's no way a single earner, I think, well, outside of anomalies, could pay for it with one commuter, I guess we'll say, unless they work from home. So.
And you observed well of Hubbard. Yes, there are a lot of parks on one side of town, 99. There seems to be a lot of opportunity along the 99 corridor. I don't know if that's where you guys are talking about, but I think 99, just like there's a picture in here, one of the businesses, it seems that there's a lot of opportunities in it.
I would ask, have you applied this to similar sized community and kind of what the results have been? If there's, some sort of evidence based on, what you're proposing in another community similar to the size of Hubbard. I know, what I mean? I know it can't be exactly because each community is different, but do you guys have comments on that? Where this has been applied, what's been successful, what's not?
Horizontal mixed use is in a lot of jurisdictions currently. Again, there may be floor area ratios sometimes again, there's frontage percentage for commercial. I know as far as the parking goes, and this is big all across Oregon, and Ben currently eliminated parking standards, and to be honest, that didn't change any conversations we've had with developers in building apartments, because no developer is going to build a zero parking. In fact, there's oftentimes we're above what the minimum was originally. I have seen some strategies of if a parking lot is of a certain size, that there can be a reduction. And the reason for that being, if you have a lot of people, let's say the residents, some people work nights, some people work days, and things like that. So it's not like they're all going to be parked there at the exact same time. Sometimes there's give and take in terms of commercial and residential. I think there might be some usage exceptions. I mean, there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox, but some tools work better for some places and some tools work better for the others.
We worked in Cornelius a few years ago, and they have a similar arrangement where they require some commercial frontage, and then it kind of fades as you go back and you can do more residential behind. We have a project in Kennewick, Washington right now that had a ratio of commercial that was required. And again, they defined the main frontage that they wanted to have that commercial. So again, building that economic viability. On that specific one, we did live work units and a food cart pod. That was the solution for that project that the city that was what that community needed.
And Mr. Chair, from my experience, I don't have experience of going into a city and changing this code because most of them have changed it already quite a while ago, right? So I can't say, hey, yes, I looked at this property and we got to change and here's what we did. But I can tell you that in those cities that we've done that have allowed horizontal mixed use, it has been a much easier access to be able to bring these type of developments forward because they're already doing that. They recognized it a while ago, right? That's all. Almost like, Commissioner said, it's like, and I agree with you. It's like, that's how we started. Then all of a sudden, we got all these lot property specific and platted everything, right? Where you can only have one use on one zone, and now we're going back to that, more of that mixed use stuff. And I think it's the right pattern.
Yeah, don't take offense at this. I'm really,
Oh.
I'm not trying to pick on you. I just wanted to know why you landed in Hubbard.
Sure.
What attracted you to, you know what I mean, to
Sure.
our specific community, because you know, that makes a difference. You know what I mean? And again, no offense. I agree with really a lot of what you're saying. I just, you know, kind of wanted to know why you were here with us.
There is a property owner that I'm working with that is excited to move a development forward.
Okay.
Right? Obviously, we cannot talk about specific property development, right?
Sure.
So this is just about text amendment, but I can say if this goes through, then you'll be seeing our face up here pretty soon to try and bring something pretty exciting forward. So that's our problem here.
Cool. Okay. And I appreciate the honesty and
Sure.
I'm not trying to pick on you. Actually, I had the same question.
And what responsibility do the developers have? So 99, we have one stoplight, we have one flashing yellow through town.
Sure.
When school lets out and the school buses are coming through, we get backed up 3 or 4 miles both sides out and out of town. So what responsibilities for traffic through 99 developers have when they put something like this in place?
But I don't know specifically, but we'll have to go through a traffic analysis that explains all of our mitigations of traffic going in and out of there, and that could come up with, I've seen it in the past, come up with new stoplights or restricted access ways, or you gotta build a roundabout 2 miles down the road or something like that. I've seen all of that. So we go through the proper requirements of putting a traffic analysis together. And then through that, the mitigations would explain what we have to do. I don't know if you have any different.
Oh, no, that's great. I said, careful what you're promising. No, I'm just kidding.
Was it roundabout? Come on, flashing lights.
So given work session and that we're pretty informal tonight, I see a couple of other folks here. Do you have comments?
Obviously, I'm for it. I want it to happen, so
Okay. I want to give an opportunity.
Oh, I
I mean,
appreciate that.
work session is pretty informal, so.
I think we could use some more housing and some more commercial. Make it look good.
Cool. I appreciate that, but.
So the 3 stories, would that have to be would that be per code? We have height restriction here for buildings, do we not?
45 feet.
45 feet.
And getting that 45 feet above commercial gets a little tricky as well, because it's kind of a certain height that commercial needs. Podiums require, podium structures require a certain height. And then that floor to floor gets really pinched in order to get above the 45. And for the mixed use, vertical mixed use building, there would be most likely no roof articulation. It would be a flat roof, parapet. And the woody walk-ups are, we're looking at, you know, a typical 10-6 floor to floor, 10-foot floor to floor, something like that. And then that allows you to have a sloped roof that gets below that 45. Yeah.
So my biggest concern are traffic. That's hell on earth from 3 to 5 every day, and that's not even help our town. I'll tell you that right now. Parking is another thing that I will not accept. At least I will not accept. If it's we all have to follow 2 parking spaces per unit or per required space, commercial or residential, and then some kind of park. We have to have some kind of park that you have to put into the design. If you want us to, well, want me to consider, because we have a lot of kids are gonna be living in there, and you're gonna be crossing that street to go to the park. I just don't see that being safe. Those are my main concerns at this point.
Commissioner, I appreciate those concerns, are some of the same concerns that we have thought through, that we know that we'll have to bring back to this decision body when we actually come with like a development application. Today, it's really just talking about through a text amendment that could even unlock the opportunity to bring something like this. And then if we can unlock that opportunity, then we can come and we can talk about, you know, certain parking ratios, and, you know, we would love to talk with a neighbor in this area about some park that might be not being used well, and how we can work through some of that type stuff. So today it's not, just not specific, any specific development,
Right,
but
but we were talking.
yeah, and those are comments that I think if we, the next step, I believe, and probably please correct me if I'm wrong, would be a joint work section with council and with you all to really then dive into what are those ratios that everyone's going to say yes to, right? So our goal in leaving this one is that we get lots of, we get some thumbs up and head nods. Guys, go spend some time. We like where you're heading with this and give us some ideas of what those ratios are so we can come back into a meeting with council, joint work session, to really maybe come up with something out of that with actual words and text that could be adopted.
Yeah, that was my question for Holly. So obviously a joint work session, we provide a recommendation to council. Council has to do the adoption of the actual language. Is that
Yes.
accurate? Okay.
Yeah, so there'd be two public hearings, one with the planning commission, one with the city council,
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're talking probably a 5-6 month process.
potentially.
Yeah.
Something to think about, I appreciate hearing the floor area ratios and the percentage of frontage. Those types of example language would be really important. I think that'll be really helpful for the next discussion. Something to think about currently is that even though your commercial zone allows dwelling units, it doesn't provide any parameters. So, for example, your R3 zone, your higher density residential zone, if you build a multifamily structure, you're required to do 25% of your gross site area as landscaping. There's a certain amount of recreational area required, which is 500 square feet plus another 50 square feet per bedroom. So there's those kinds of parameters in your R3 zone, but those are not currently in your general commercial zones. So if we talk about increasing the opportunities for multifamily, we can think about, are these other parameters that we should be talking about in this work session so that we're sure we get a quality product that serves our community best with this new language. So we can bring some of that to the next discussion as well.
Yeah, that was something that on these renderings, I didn't know what we were, if they were meeting green space, to mean percentages, or if they were, just, sort of these matter as, but
There's
some
a
of them
landscape,
I can definitely see that they are meeting, but there's,
there's a landscape percentage on them, and currently since it's commercial, I believe it only, if you did vertical mixed use, you only need 10% landscaping.
yeah.
Which is essentially the parking lot trees and the setback.
Exactly, medians,
Yeah, and back to market, we would never do something like that because that the people that are living in those apartments are gonna need something way more beyond that. Yeah, so.
Alrighty,
One more comment.
sure, go ahead.
So floor area ratio is not a concept that a lot of the small towns have in their development codes. It will be very helpful in our next discussion to have some illustrations of what that means in terms of how we load sites and what that feels like, and maybe some examples. That'll be really helpful.
Yeah, I think we were looking at that more as floor area ratio of commercial to residential.
Right.
And I know a lot of, and again, I have a lot of experience with the Venn development code, but we've been taking that out
Yeah.
because it seems very arbitrary, and it's the setbacks, height limits, things like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of more of a determining factor of
Right.
what the intent is. One thing that we didn't mention is also currently there's just 2 spaces per unit, so 3-bedroom is treated the same as a studio. Some jurisdictions have a gradient depending on how many bedrooms there are. And that's something that you could look at, because if you just have 2 spaces per unit, that the development code then is encouraging larger apartments as opposed to a mix.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I would think that if we're gonna be building apartments, we would follow the R3 code. That's my thinking, if we were gonna do anything. So working session, so that's my thoughts. Why would we allow something, everybody else has to follow, and this falls under a certain zoning? We're trying to squeeze it in or, you know, get it done. I just don't see how we should follow the code for apartments now or houses. I want this to happen, but I want my town to function. I don't, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm against it, I'm not. But there's no way that we submitted here is gonna work, in my mind. There's just not enough information for one thing. The other thing is Paulie brought up, the code for apartments. I mean, I don't see how we could do something in commercial and follow commercial zoning. Because of the complex, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Commissioner, I think we'll have a lot more information when we come back to that next joint working session. Based upon all of your feedback today, as well as staff's feedback too.
Any more questions, comments to send back to them? Not looking like a lot. So next step, would be to do a little collaborating.
Yeah, if there's consensus from the planning commission that we should move forward with this discussion, yeah.
There's that. Is anybody objecting to moving forward with that conversation?
What information specifically would be helpful for you in your next discussion when we have to counsel with this?
What the zoning is and what this would probably be from the applicant. So they would have, well, the zoning would be if they're commercial up front, they get their parking spaces, and then from there it goes apartments. They would have to follow the R3 for the apartment. With the R3, the apartment,
That's where the multifamily standards are
Multifamily, yeah.
located currently.
yeah.
Mhm.
So that would be one thing. The spaces for park or a park or play area would be the biggest thing for me. You just can't see kids running across the street. I just couldn't see approving some of my part of these. What about the city? We can handle the storm, the sewer and water and all that probably. That's a different conversation. Yeah. Yeah, right. No, that's a different day.
Go ahead, Helen.
We don't always have fire present at planning commission meetings. I'm wondering if there's any, if we can put you on the spot. If there are any considerations in terms of the types of structures, the location of structures, height, apparatus, anything unique that might come up?
Yeah, the height is 45 feet, and that's the max of what we can get our ladders to. We can't get our ladders to 45 feet, but we can get them up to make, you know, potential rescues and access. So I'm not really concerned about that. I am in favor of I should say, I'm in favor of segregating the commercial buildings and the residential buildings. And that's because from a risk management standpoint, most house fires happen, or I should say, most fires occur in residential structures. I think that by moving forward with this, it can make it, you get a business developer that comes in and builds, they're not going to want to put apartments above their expensive commercial building, because the commercial folks are held to a fire code, where residential, we don't have any enforcement authority, or we have very little enforcement authority. So that puts them at greater risk of a fire. Now, does every developer think of that? Does every builder think of that? No, but probably the ones that are doing it over and over and a lot will take that into consideration. The other thing is just from the apartments we have over the businesses here in town on 3rd Street. Those are, it's got very limited access for us to get up there, besides using ladders. So I'm in huge favor of having an apartment complex, because those have a lot more entryways and exit ways, egress ways that we can get in and out. Also, when a new building's built, when you just put in several apartments over a commercial building, we typically don't have sprinklers. But when a new building is put in, a new commercial apartment building isn't built, then they usually have to have sprinklers installed. Sprinklers are better for everybody. It makes it safer for the people that live there. It allows us to get in there if there's a fire and be more effective as we wait for other resources. So generally, I'm in favor of it.
Those are great comments, thank you.
Thank you for letting us put you on the spot.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions or?
So if the idea is to build along Highway 99E, would there be any issues with ODOT and pedestrian access crossing that highway?
I don't think we'd be doing a new access point.
Okay.
Right, so, and again, once we do our traffic analysis, they will get the way in. So we'll see whatever they ask us
Right.
for, right?
I'll get
I have to go through that.
Are those random questions for fire? When it is the heavy 3 PM to 5 PM time and you need to get up or down 99, is there room to get around traffic on 99 with what we have now? Yeah, we go a little slower. Obviously, we don't want to cause an accident. We don't want to be in an accident ourselves. But the 99 is wide enough that it gives cars a chance to move over to the side of the road and gives us plenty of space to get by.
Any kind of timeline? Think you're Holly or Sean? I was thinking we're just gonna add it to our schedule and.
So maybe August for a joint meeting. Okay. So we're having the joint meetings at the planning commission or council?
We talked about the July 16th.
What else do we have?
The mayor's out on the 1st of August. We talked about July 16th for the potential, no, but
We did, but I thought we had several applications on.
yes, we have, commissioners permit and variance. Those two could be pretty quick.
So we potentially might have a joint meeting on the 16th of July.
Okay.
I think we need to discuss it a little bit more, make sure that we have our timing right, because we do have some other applications. They may be a quick application, and then that would give me enough time for the joint session.
Does that give us posting, enough type of posting requirements?
Yeah, so if you guys can tentatively put that on your calendar, that would be great. And then I'll let you know.
And that'll be in person again, I'm assuming.
Can we have a remote option for that one? I'll be on a business trip that week, but I can participate remotely.
Remote option is always available.
Alrighty, if there's nothing else, it is 7:27. Motion to adjourn.
Thank you all so much, appreciate your time.
Yeah, you bet.
Your comments.
All those in favor of adjournment? Aye. You're down. Thanks, you guys.
So the movies that we have. And I don't know, it's like words.
Thanks, again. Thank you.
Rat on the one movie.
Yeah, I know the business owner, like, I don't know.
It's funny how they're having this parameter.
And then you have a restaurant, and then the fun part of how do you get
That rate of blue.
through all of it. Yeah, elevators, yes, yeah, sure. And so, yeah, if we can start collaborating a meeting, I agree, I'll see.
Other towns,
Need,
the vertical.
for.
They're fun to do in the right.